Just watch the wedding on the live stream, Dad. LOL. That was the email I received from the daughter whose wedding I was draining my life savings for. The reason? Her future mother-in-law wanted an intimate ceremony and needed to cut the guest list. And the first person on the chopping block was none other than the father who had spent his entire life building a foundation for her. My love and sacrifice had been turned into a cheap joke. My daughter had no idea she'd just made a grave mistake. She had forgotten that her father is an engineer, and an engineer knows one thing for certain: when the foundation is attacked, you don't just stand there, you take action. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. I shook my head, trying to dispel the persistent quiet sorrow that haunted the silent house. The past was for cherishing, not for drowning in. The present and a bright future, that's what mattered now. And the wedding of my daughter, Emily, was that brilliant future? I sat down at the computer in my small home office, the bone-deep weariness from a long day on the construction site seeming to melt away, replaced by the warm energy of a father preparing for the most important day in his daughter's life. On the screen, the flight confirmation to Napa Valley was still open, a steadfast promise. I had booked 2 tickets, one for me and one for Luke. I pictured it clearly. Father and son flying out together, getting suited up together, witnessing that sacred moment together. It had been too long since my son and I had taken a trip, just the 2 of us. Work, life, our separate worries had pulled us apart. Maybe this would be a good chance for the Collins men to truly reconnect. I opened another tab, the website of a high-end suit maker appearing. I'm not a fancy man. My wardrobe consists mostly of faded work shirts and worn-out jeans, but this was different. This was the day my daughter would become a bride. I wanted to look sharp, steadfast, worthy of walking her down the aisle and giving her away to another man. I scrolled through the designs, imagining myself trying them on. A rare, gentle smile touched my lips. I could even picture Helen, my late wife, standing beside me. She would be nagging me about my choice of tie, then tying it perfectly for me herself. "You'd better look handsome," I could almost hear her voice whispering in my ear. "It's our little girl's day." I saved a few suit styles, making a mental note to visit the shop on the weekend. The next task was the most important, the one I had been quietly preparing for a long time. I opened my personal finance spreadsheet, a meticulous habit of an old-school engineer. The $30,000 I had transferred to Emily a few months ago for the venue deposit and initial services was highlighted in red, marked completed. Beside it was another note. Phase 2, $50,000, final venue payment, wedding gift. It was a huge sum, nearly all the money I had painstakingly saved over the past few years, but there wasn't a flicker of hesitation in my heart. This wasn't an expense. It was an investment in my daughter's happiness. I planned to transfer the money next week, right before the wedding, as a surprise. I wanted to see the look of shock and joy on her face. I wanted her and her husband to have the most solid start possible, free from financial worries. This was how I showed my love, not with flowery words, but with a solid foundation. I reached for my desk calendar, a relic that the younger generation might find obsolete, but to me it held a sense of certainty nothing digital could replace. I flipped to the next month. With a red ink pen, I carefully circled the 24th. Below it, in the neat block letters of an engineer, I wrote, "Emily's big day." I even drew a small heart next to it, a seemingly foolish gesture for a man nearing 60. But I didn't care. It was how I truly felt. Leaning back in my chair, I stared at that red circle. It was like a beacon of joy, a focal point in my quiet life. Every sacrifice, every late night at work, every missed vacation, it all seemed to converge on that one day. The day I would watch my daughter begin a new chapter of her life, happy and whole. The day I could proudly say to Helen, if she were here, "You see, honey? We did it. I kept my promise." In that moment, I felt a deep sense of peace and contentment. I closed my eyes, savoring the simple, immense joy. I was completely unaware that the happiness I was nursing was as fragile as a soap bubble, and that in a few seconds the familiar ding of my inbox would sound, a tiny noise, but one with enough force to pierce that bubble and turn all my hopes to ash. The ding from my computer pulled me from my sweet reverie. A new email. I glanced at the screen, another smile forming when I saw the sender. Emily. She probably had some exciting wedding update to share, or maybe just a sweet note for her old man. There was no subject line, but I didn't mind. I clicked open the email, my heart still buoyant with happiness. My smile froze. Then, slowly, it dissolved as if it had never been there. The email began with a single word, Dad. Not dearest Dad, or hi Dad, or even hey, just Dad. It was like a label, a dry, impersonal address. A sense of foreboding began to creep into my chest. I read on, each word a shard of broken glass against my eyes. Emily explained that she and Andrew, along with his family, had finalized the guest list for the ceremony in Napa Valley, and after much consideration, they had decided that it would be best if I watched the wedding via livestream. Livestream. The word hung before my eyes, meaningless and absurd. She added that Andrew's mother was very particular about the number of guests and wanted to keep things intimate. Intimate. A wedding so intimate there was no room for the father who raised the bride. I read the sentence again, twice, 3 times, trying to find another meaning, some kind of misunderstanding. But there was none. The words remained on the screen, cold and cruel. And then, as if that knife hadn't been twisted deep enough, she ended the email with a line that left me breathless, a line that felt like salt poured into an open wound. If you still want to be a part of it, you can watch through the Google Meet link we set up. It'll be just like you're there. LOL. LOL. Laughing out loud. My daughter, the child I had spent my life protecting, had just told me to stay home and watch her get married through a computer screen, and she found it funny. All sound in the room seemed to vanish. The ticking of the grandfather clock ceased. There was only a dull ringing in my ears. I stared at the screen for so long the letters began to dance. The coffee beside me had long gone cold. My hands didn't tremble. I didn't cry. Strangely, I felt nothing but a cold, hollow emptiness. It was as if something inside me had quietly shattered, as if the ground beneath my feet had cracked open into a chasm, yet somehow I remained standing. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to argue. In that moment, all I wanted was clarity. And the clarity was right there, in those 3 soulless letters, LOL. I had become a joke in my own life story. My sacrifices, my love, all of it had been reduced to a Google Meet link and a laugh. My fingers moved over the keyboard, slowly, deliberately. I would not show her my pain. I would not give her the satisfaction of guilt or the need to justify herself. I would give her a silence, a withdrawal that would echo louder than any scream. I typed 4 words. Of course. Enjoy your big day. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop. The soft click of the machine sounded like a door slamming shut forever. That was the day I stopped pretending my sacrifices meant anything to my daughter. That was the day everything started to change. Memory is a strange thing. It can transport you back in time in the blink of an eye. I was no longer in my silent living room. I was in my backyard on a golden afternoon 15 years ago. The smell of freshly cut grass was thick in the air, and the drone of cicadas was a constant hum. Emily, 17, was behind the wheel of our old family car. Her face was beaded with sweat, but her eyes were bright with concentration as she struggled with parallel parking. "Dad, look! I got it in reverse. No more jerking!" she shouted, her radiant smile showing off a set of metal braces. I stood beside her, trying to hide a proud grin behind the stern mask of an instructor. "Good," I said. "Easy does it." Helen was sitting on the porch steps, a glass of iced tea in her hand, watching us with a gentle smile. The afternoon sun made her hair shine like a halo. To me, she was always an angel. When Emily finally got the car into place, she switched off the engine in triumph and threw her arms around me. A warmth spread through my body. My little girl was about to get her driver's license, about to fly the nest. I walked with her toward the porch. Helen looked at us, her eyes holding an ocean of love. "Look at her, Arthur," she said, her voice as soft as a breeze. "She's all grown up." Sometimes I get so tired, worrying about everything, but just seeing our children happy and standing strong on their own 2 feet, it makes all our struggles worthwhile. Her words touched the deepest part of my soul. As a man, I rarely spoke of my burdens. I just turned them into overtime hours and late-night projects. My family was my foundation. I sat down and pulled both my wife and daughter into a hug. "It is," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "More than worthwhile." That memory was etched into my mind. When Helen was taken from us suddenly, her words became my mantra, the promise I shouldered for both of us. Standing before her photograph in the empty house, I silently vowed to her spirit that I would do anything to ensure our children could stand strong so that all our struggles would be worthwhile. That promise became my reason for being, the only fire that warmed me through the lonely years. The memory dissolved like smoke. I was back in the present, a chilling pain now replacing the initial shock. The emptiness had given way to something colder, a slow-burning rage. This anger was not for a foolish decision or wounded pride. It was for a betrayal of that sacred promise, of Helen's memory, of the very foundation we had spent our lives building. "It makes all our struggles worthwhile." Helen's words echoed in my head, but now they sounded like a bitter mockery. That promise was my foundation. And with 1 email and 3 letters, LOL, Emily had just taken a sledgehammer to it. As an engineer, I knew one thing. When the foundation is attacked, you don't just stand by and watch it crumble. You take action. The construction site was my kingdom, a symphony of organized chaos built of steel and concrete. For 30 years, this noise was music to me, a testament to creation. But this morning, it was a torturous cacophony. Every sound was like a mallet striking my eardrums, deepening the hollowness inside. I stood on the 3rd floor of an unfinished office building, a roll of blueprints in my hand. But my mind had drifted elsewhere, to a terrifying, quiet place where the cold words of an email repeated on a loop. Livestream, intimate, LOL. They were like viruses that had infected my operating system, paralyzing all logical thought. How could an engineer like me, who built structures to withstand earthquakes, have a family foundation so easily demolished by a few careless words? The truth made me feel helpless, a feeling I despised. "Hey, boss!" A familiar voice pulled me from my thoughts. It was Frank, my best friend and the site's construction manager. We'd worked together since college. He stopped beside me. "You're holding those upside down, Arthur." I flinched, looking down. He was right. A rookie mistake. I silently flipped them over, a hot flush of shame creeping up my neck. Frank didn't laugh. "Hey, what's really going on?" he asked, his voice low. "You look like you've seen a ghost." A stone was lodged in my throat. How could I explain a pain so absurd? I just shook my head. "Nothing. Just didn't sleep well last night?" Frank grunted, not buying it. "Didn't sleep well? You look like you haven't slept in a week. You forgot to put sugar in your coffee this morning. You never forget the sugar." I didn't respond. His concern was a kindness, but it also threatened to bring down the wall I was trying so hard to build. I couldn't afford to be weak. Frank sighed, clapping a heavy, understanding hand on my shoulder. All right. You don't want to talk, I won't push. But you know," he said, "if you need someone to grab a few beers with after work, you call me." With that, he turned and headed back to his crew. I stood there, surrounded by the din, yet feeling more alone than ever. I folded the blueprints. A sudden clarity returned. I couldn't keep functioning like a soulless machine. I needed to do something, a concrete action, a decisive move, and I knew exactly where to start. I didn't go back to work. After Frank left, I stood there for a few more minutes, letting a cold resolve solidify within me. Then, without a word, I drove out of the dusty construction zone, not heading home but toward the city center. I parked in front of First Federal Bank, where I'd been a customer for 30 years. It was where I opened my first savings account, got the mortgage for my house, and set up college funds for my children. Every financial milestone of my life was tied to this place, and today it would witness another, one of severance. Inside, the cool air was a stark contrast to the storm raging within me. Everything was orderly, quiet, and professional. Carlos, the branch manager, saw me and immediately rose from his desk. "Good morning, Mr. Collins," he said, extending a hand with a perpetual smile. "It's been a while." "I hope everything is well?" I shook his hand, my grip limp. "Carlos, I need your help with something." "Of course, sir. Please have a seat." We sat at a client table. Carlos's pleasant smile remained. "What can I do for you?" "With Miss Emily's big day coming up, you must be very busy." His words were a small jab at my wound, but my face was a stoic mask. "I need to cancel a wire transfer," I said flatly, the evenness of my voice surprising me. Carlos's smile faltered. "A wire transfer, sir? You mean the $50,000 transfer to the event venue in Napa that you scheduled last week?" "That's the one." He looked hesitant, tapping on his keyboard. "There might be a cancellation fee, sir." "May I ask why? Is there an issue with the vendor?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Circumstances have changed." Those 3 words hung in the air. Carlos was a professional. He understood that was an answer that permitted no further questions. He looked at his screen, then let out a small sigh of relief. "You're in luck. The transfer is still pending. We caught it just in time." He printed a form. "You just need to sign here to confirm the cancellation." He offered me the pen, then paused, looking at me with genuine concern. "Mr. Collins, are you sure about this? $50,000 is a significant amount." "Is everything really all right?" I looked down at the paper. The number 50,000 was clearly printed next to the words, "Wedding gift for Emily Collins." I took the pen. The scratch of the nib on the paper sounded sharp. I signed my name, a decisive, unwavering signature. It wasn't just a signature, it was a declaration. I pushed the paper back to Carlos. "I'm sure." As I walked out of the bank, The morning sun felt brighter, harsher. I didn't feel happy or sad. I felt relieved, as if an invisible weight had just been set down. I knew the storm was coming, the accusations, tears, and blame. But for the first time, I felt ready to face it. I had taken back control. I got home as the afternoon was fading. The initial rage and pain from Emily's call had subsided, replaced by a cold, hollow feeling. I didn't go inside right away, instead heading to my workshop. This was my sanctuary, a world of wood, linseed oil, and simple, honest physics. I flicked on the single overhead bulb, its warm yellow light flooding the space. The familiar scent of pine and sawdust filled my nostrils, a smell of labor and creation. I began to meticulously clean each tool, the hand plane my father left me, the set of chisels I bought with my first paycheck, the handsaw with its wooden handle worn smooth by my own sweat. This was how I found my balance. In the midst of this ritual, the phone on my workbench began to vibrate violently. The screen lit up with Emily. My heart no longer clenched. There was only a profound weariness. I had given so much. I had nothing left to give. I let it vibrate. It stopped, then started again. I calmly reached over and switched it to silent. The screen continued to flash on and off, like a desperate lighthouse signaling for help. But my ship had already changed course. A little while later, the doorbell rang, a series of frantic, impatient presses. I knew the storm had arrived. I set the cloth down, turned off the workshop light, and slowly walked into the house. It was Luke. My son stood on the porch, still in his work clothes. The moment I opened the door, he strode past me. "Dad," he began, his voice edged with reproach, "why aren't you answering your phone? Do you have any idea what's going on? Emily is freaking out." I calmly closed the door. "Hello, son." My composure only agitated him more. "She said you're not coming to the wedding. What's going on?" "I'm not making things difficult," I replied, my voice even. "I'm simply accepting your sister's offer to watch via livestream." Luke faltered, looking uncomfortable. "I know, that was bad, but Andrew's parents are footing most of the bill, Dad. This is a big deal to them." Just then, Luke's phone rang shrilly. "It's Emily," he said, fumbling and accidentally putting it on speaker. "Luke, where are you? Why aren't you answering my texts?" Emily's voice filled the living room, shrill and anxious. Luke scrambled to turn off the speaker, but it was too late. "I'm at Dad's," he stammered. "Good. Put him on the phone. Is he trying to ruin everything on purpose?" Calm down," Luke tried to soothe her. He's upset too." Emily let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Upset? Or just proud? He's always so stubborn. Don't you get it, Luke? This is a Napa Valley wedding, not some backyard barbecue. He probably couldn't even afford the flight if I didn't offer to pay for it. He'd just show up and make us look bad." "Emily, don't say that," Luke cried out, horrified. He finally managed to switch off the speaker, then turned to me, his face pale. "Dad, I'm sorry. She's just panicking. She didn't mean—" He couldn't finish. We both knew the words spoken in panic are often the most honest. I said nothing about her insults. The emptiness inside me was now filled with a cold, hard clarity. Luke, still missing the point, returned to their only real concern. "Dad, I know she was wrong," he pleaded, "but what about the money? They really need it to pay for the venue. Can't we deal with the feelings later?" "The money?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You still think this is about money, Luke? I stood up. I paid $30,000. I was going to give another $50,000. That's $80,000. For a wedding where I am not welcome, from a daughter who thinks I can't afford a plane ticket. I stepped closer, my voice low but carrying the weight of years. I have worked my entire life to provide, but I am not an ATM, Luke, a machine that doesn't have feelings, that doesn't require respect. Luke took a step back, stunned. He stammered, trying to grasp one last argument. This isn't the time for philosophy, Dad. She needs that money. You can't just ruin everything because your pride is hurt. You're always so selfish. That was the final blow, the final denial, the final insult to everything I had ever done. I had nothing left to say. I pointed to the door. Get out of my house. He stared, dumbfounded. What? I am done being a ghost who only materializes when someone needs my wallet. I heard what your sister thinks of me, and now I've heard what you think. That's enough, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Go. Luke looked at me for another second, then turned and walked quickly out. The door clicked shut behind him. I stood alone in the living room, feeling neither free nor hurt. I felt nothing at all. It was as if a part of me had just died, and in that void I knew exactly what I had to do next. The ticking of the grandfather clock was my only companion. It was a constant reminder of time slipping by in silence. My dinner had gone cold. I ate mechanically, not tasting it. The silence in this house had a weight of its own, making the smallest sounds feel like jarring acoustic events. It had been 5 years since Helen, my wife, had passed, but I had never gotten used to this quiet. As I stood to clear the table, my hand reached for 2 plates, an old habit from decades of shared life. I stopped short, staring at the superfluous plate. The blue rose pattern Helen had loved seemed to mock me. A familiar wave of emptiness washed over me. I quietly placed the plate back in the cabinet, the clink of porcelain sounding cold and final. This house was once a kingdom of sound. Helen's soft humming, Emily's shrieks as she played tag with her brother Luke, the constant drone of the TV. Now, those sounds were just ghosts echoing in my mind. I walked through the living room, my hand brushing against the worn leather of the armchair where Helen used to read. I could picture her there, smiling, a smile that could erase all the fatigue of a long day for a construction engineer like me. Finally, I stopped before what I called the Wall of Time, a collection of photographs documenting every milestone of the Collins family. From Emily's ultrasound picture to the day Luke graduated from college. I was a builder, but my 2 children were the greatest project of my life, a project Helen and I had built with all our love and sacrifice. But when projects are completed, they take on a life of their own. Emily was now 32, a successful professional in another city. Luke was 29, about to be married, with a life of his own. They no longer needed me to fix their bicycles or teach them how to drive. Sometimes I felt like an old harbor. The ships had long since set sail, but the harbor remained, wearily waiting for a day they might return. My hand reached up, touching a photo of me, Helen, and a 7-year-old Emily, grinning in the backyard. Emily was missing 2 front teeth, her smile innocent and as bright as the sun. Helen rested her head on my shoulder, her eyes sparkling with happiness. I remembered the smell of fresh-cut grass and the feeling of utter contentment as I held the 2 most important women in my life. My thumb gently brushed over Helen's face in the photo. If only she were here, if only she could see how beautiful and radiant our daughter would look in her wedding dress. And then the image blurred, melting into a distant memory, filled with sunlight and laughter. The door closed behind Luke, leaving me in a silence worse than screaming. I collapsed into Helen's armchair, burying my face in my hands. For the first time, I felt like I was about to break. What had I done wrong? I had spent my life building, protecting, and providing. Why was my reward contempt and dismissal? I remembered the night everything started to fall apart. I overheard Emily's voice on Luke's phone, filled with disappointment. "It's so embarrassing that they invited your dad's construction worker friends to a classy wedding like ours." Then came the mortal wound. "Your parents can't even afford the flight," she blurted out with a hollow laugh. My efforts and sacrifices turned to dust in those 3 cruel letters. LOL. In that dark moment, a voice echoed in my head, my friend Frank's. "If you need someone to grab a few beers with, you call me." I shakily reached for my phone, found Frank, and pressed call. "Yeah," his voice came through, loud with machinery. "Frank," my voice was a raw croak, "that offer, for a few beers, does it still stand?" "I'm on my way," he said without a single question. "The Anchor Bar. 15 minutes. When I arrived at our usual spot, Frank was already there, with 2 large, frothy beers waiting. He said nothing, just nodded for me to sit. I took a long pull of the beer, its cool bitterness somewhat calming the storm in my chest. We sat in silence for most of the first glass. Frank was a good friend. He knew when to talk and when to be quiet. Finally, he spoke. "So, what's had you looking like you're at a funeral all day?" And then I told him everything. The words poured out of me like a broken dam, about the plane tickets, the $50,000 wedding gift, the cold email, and the phone call I had overheard. Throughout it all, Frank just listened. He didn't interrupt or offer pity. He sat there, his rugged face growing harder, his hands clenched into fists. When I finished, my throat was raw. Slam! Frank slammed his beer mug on the table, beer sloshing over the side. He looked me straight in the eye, his own eyes burning with fury. "I can't believe it," he growled. "Damn it, these kids today. Do they think money grows on trees? Do they think respect is that cheap?" He leaned forward across the table, his anger on my behalf a comfort I desperately needed. Sunlight, the clear, expensive kind found in high-rise apartments overlooking the city, flooded Emily and Andrew's living room. On the marble coffee table, invitation samples with elegant calligraphy were arranged neatly next to spools of cream-colored silk ribbon. Everything in the room screamed calculated perfection, the elaborate preparations for a dream wedding. But the air was thick with tension. Emily was pacing on the plush rug, her phone pressed tightly to her ear, her beautiful face contorted with anxiety. Andrew sat on the sofa, pretending to scroll through his phone, but the slight furrow in his brow showed he was listening intently. "What do you mean the transaction failed?" Emily's voice was high-pitched, bordering on panic. No, there must be some mistake." That was the final payment for the venue. "Can you please try it again? Please?" She fell silent, listening, her free hand coming up to nervously bite at her nails. The person on the other end seemed to be delivering a long, procedural explanation. Slowly, the color drained from Emily's face. "The deadline was yesterday? But we thought," she stammered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Please don't cancel our reservation. It's our wedding. We've been planning this for a year." A long pause. Andrew finally put his phone down, looking up at her with annoyance. "No, please. Hello? Hello?" Emily said desperately into the dead phone. She slowly lowered it, the device slipping from her limp hand and landing silently on the rug. She looked at Andrew, her eyes welling with tears. "They canceled it," she said, her voice breaking. "They said the payment wasn't made by the deadline yesterday. The venue is open for booking again. We lost it, Andrew. We lost the venue." Andrew shot to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief. "What do you mean, lost it? You told me your father was handling it." "I thought he was." Emily burst into tears, her panic now curdling into fury. "But he didn't. He did it on purpose. And it's all your fault, and your mother's." "My fault?" Andrew snapped, his voice defensive. "How is this my fault or my mother's?" "It is," Emily screamed back, tears streaming down her face. "If we hadn't cut my dad from the list, if your mother hadn't come up with that stupid intimate idea, none of this would be happening. My father is hurt, and now he's punishing us." Andrew scoffed, a sound full of contempt. "Punishing us? Or is he acting like a child? This is on him. Who knew he would be so petty and stubborn?" He advanced on her, pointing a finger in her face. "My mother just wanted a beautiful wedding, Emily. An elegant, memorable wedding. Your father is trying to ruin it over a little bit of pride. Can't he just accept that his daughter is moving into a better world?" "A better world?" Emily stared, recoiling as if struck. "You mean a world where there's no place for an old construction worker who spent his entire life raising me? A world where family doesn't matter as much as whether the guests fit the vineyard aesthetic?" "Don't twist my words," Andrew roared, his usual smooth demeanor completely gone, revealing a cold condescension. "You know that's not what I mean. But you have to be realistic. This wedding is the gateway to our future, my future, and yours too. You can't let your father's sentimental feelings ruin it." "Sentimental feelings?" she repeated, her voice laced with bitterness. "My father paid $30,000 for this future of yours, and he was going to give another $50,000. That's not sentiment, Andrew, that's love." That information gave Andrew a moment's pause, but he quickly hardened again. "Well, then the problem is even simpler. He has the money. He's just pouting. It's your job to go and make up with him." "Me? Why me?" "Because he's your father," Andrew shouted, his patience gone. "Either you go talk sense into him and get that money, or we don't have a wedding at all. Your choice." He didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed his jacket, shoved his phone in his pocket, and stormed out the door, slamming it behind him. Emily stood frozen in the middle of the room. The slam of the door echoed, leaving a terrible silence. She looked around at the silk ribbons, the expensive invitations, all the symbols of a perfect wedding that now looked like the wreckage of a shattered dream. She slowly sank to the floor, buried her face in her hands, and began to sob. In her attempt to have everything, she realized she was on the verge of losing it all. A few days after my confrontation with Luke, a strange peace settled over my house. The storm seemed to have passed, leaving a deep quiet in its wake. I no longer waited for frantic phone calls or insistent doorbells. I had said what needed to be said, done what needed to be done. The rest was no longer in my control. That evening, as I was sitting on the back porch, Emily's best friend, Sophia, came to see me. Her face was etched with worry and hesitation. "Hi, Mr. Collins," she said softly. "I'm sorry to just show up like this." "It's all right, Sophia. Come in. I just made some tea." We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the chirping of crickets in the garden. I knew she wasn't here to reminisce. I waited patiently. "Mr. Collins, Emily is a mess," Sophia finally said, her voice small and sad. "They lost the venue. The florist, the photographer, everyone has canceled, Andrew's parents are threatening to call off the whole thing." I said nothing, just gave a slight nod for her to continue. "She's panicking," Sophia went on, looking down at her teacup. "She knows she was wrong, sir. She just doesn't know how to fix it. She's been crying a lot." I looked at Sophia, at the kind, compassionate young woman I remembered. "Is that why you're here, Sophia? To fix it for her?" I looked at her, at the youthful hope in her eyes, and I felt a profound sadness, not for myself, but for her entire generation. "Sophia," I began, my voice gentle but firm, "you're a good kid. I've always been fond of you. Thank you for caring enough to come all this way. I spent a lifetime building a house of love for my daughter." And then she told me to stand outside and look in through the window. "The issue isn't the window, Sophia. It's the act of telling the man who built the house that he has to stay outside." Sophia's shoulders slumped. "Even if she truly apologizes?" "Words are easy, Sophia," I said, "but the people who truly love you don't wait until you've cut them off to realize your worth. No, Sophia, nothing can change that." Sophia nodded slowly. "I understand. I'm sorry, Mr. Collins." "You have nothing to be sorry for," I replied. She didn't stay long. She didn't try to argue or persuade me further. She just quietly finished her tea, thanked me, and stepped back out into the night. I walked her to the gate. As it clicked shut, I knew it was the final door closing on that chapter of my life. There was no anger, no satisfaction, just a quiet acceptance. Sometimes the only way to be seen is to walk away, and I was, at long last, ready to move on. After that evening, no one else came to bother me. The house returned to its usual quiet, but now I no longer felt lonely in it. I had faced the storm and was ready to rebuild. About 2 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Luke. I hadn't spoken to him since I'd asked him to leave. I hesitated, then decided to answer. He was still my son. "Hello," I said, my voice calm. "Dad." Luke's voice was strained. "I'm calling. I just wanted to let you know. Emily's wedding was yesterday." I waited in silence. "It wasn't what was planned," he continued. "No Napa, no vineyard. They just had a small ceremony in Andrew's parents' backyard. Just a few family members and friends." "I see," I replied without emotion. I could picture it, a rushed, strained wedding. She cried," Luke said quietly. "She didn't look happy." "I understand," I said, and I truly did. But my understanding was now that of an outsider. "Thank you for calling, Luke." "Dad," he hesitated, "are you okay?" "I'm okay, son," I answered, and it was the truth. "I'm really okay." We hung up, and I looked out at the garden. A wedding had happened without me. I should have felt pain, but strangely, I only felt a sense of distance. That story was no longer mine. A few days later, an email from Emily arrived. The subject line was blank. A part of me, still a father, wanted to know what she would say. I made a cup of tea, sat down, and opened it. The first half was an apology. She said she was wrong, that she had let the pressure from her future in-laws get to her. The words seemed sincere, but I read them with a detached indifference, like a confession from a stranger. In the second half, the tone shifted. The apology gave way to blame and justification. She said I had been too rigid and unforgiving, that my actions had ruined the most important day of her life. She said I had turned my love into a weapon to punish her. I read to the last line, then sat silently. I didn't feel angry or sad. A flicker of melancholy passed through me, not for myself, but for her. She still didn't get it. She didn't understand that the issue was never about money or a fancy wedding. It was about respect. She was still seeing everything through the lens of her own loss, failing to recognize that she was the one who had made the first crack in the foundation. This letter wasn't an olive branch. It was a final attempt to pull me back into her drama, to share the burden of her guilt. But I didn't want to play that role anymore. I moved the cursor to the archive button. I didn't reply or delete it. I simply filed it away, like an old memento. It was a part of the past, but it held no power over the present. As the email disappeared from my inbox, I felt a true sense of peace. That book was closed, not with a happy ending, not with a tragedy. It was simply over, and now I was ready to write a new chapter. Several months passed. Summer gave way to the first crisp breezes of autumn. I had been spending most of my free time in the garage, restoring my father's old pickup truck. It was a rust bucket when I started, but slowly, under my hands, it was taking shape again. The work became a form of therapy. In this garage, everything was fixable. One Saturday afternoon, as I was tightening a bolt, Luke appeared in the doorway. He was holding a brand-new, still-packaged tool set. We had spoken a few times on the phone, but this was the first time he had come back to the house. He stood on the threshold. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice quiet. "Hey, son," I replied, not putting down my wrench. He didn't come in right away. "This is for you," he said, stepping forward and placing the toolbox on a nearby workbench. "I noticed your old set was getting pretty worn." I looked at the gleaming set of chrome vanadium wrenches, a thoughtful, practical gift, very much like me. I set down my old wrench. "Thank you." Luke stuffed his hands in his pockets. "Dad," he started, his voice halting, I came to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I was wrong." I looked my son directly in the eye. I saw no excuses, only sincerity. He wasn't trying to explain away Emily's actions. He was simply taking responsibility for his own part. I didn't know what to say. This apology I once thought I would never hear. Now that it was here, I felt no triumph, only a quiet sadness for all we had lost. I didn't need any more words. I gave a single nod, a silent acceptance. Then I picked up a clean rag and tossed it to him. "Here," I said, "help me clean out this carburetor." Luke caught the rag, a flicker of relief in his eyes. He didn't say anything more. He just silently walked over, rolled up his sleeves, and started working beside me. In the afternoon sun, 2 men, one old and one young, worked in comfortable silence. There were no hugs, no tears, just the clinking of metal, the smell of engine oil, and a connection being slowly repaired, not with words, but with presence and action. Thank you for listening to the story until the end. If you've ever been through a similar situation or have any thoughts on this story, please share them in the comments so we can discuss them together. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story.